Introduce Believe and who they are and what we do. So Believe is a French company with offices in 32 countries globally. So we're at its core a digital distributor. So at base level we take digital assets from artists, labels, managers, and we distribute them across 400 or so services globally. So that's kind of our core offering to our clients. We've currently got about 300 employees globally, and on my side, I work on the retail side of things, so gaining artists' releases exposure across retail platforms, Apple, Spotify, down to very niche platforms like Bleep and Beatport. So that's kind of what we do, and then in addition to that, we also tack on extra services and create more value than just straight distribution. So we do marketing, we do digital marketing, we do social media marketing, synchronization, neighboring rights, publishing, and recently, over the past sort of 2 years, we've also kind of developed label services. So that offers a physical route globally to clients that require those kind of services, and that can also include press, PR, and marketing in those different territories. So that's kind of what we do as a company and what we can kind of offer. To kind of speak a little bit about, I guess, where we've been in Africa, we haven't really been here as a presence. We haven't had people working here up to this point, but that's something we're looking at sort of quite intently at the moment. We've worked with African artists, both from a legacy standpoint, so sort of loosely we could term them world music artists, and we've worked lots of releases in those areas. Plus we're working with kind of many new African artists that are perhaps working with the Western labels. A prime example recently over the past couple of years is the BSAMC2015, who a Nigerian band but live in London, and they're having great success on a label called Soundway, which has kind of been traditionally a world music label. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at and what we do and what we offer.
Okay, so I mean, I think just to sort of paint a picture for everyone, I mean, what is kind of the status on downloads at the moment?
So I think everyone kind of generally knows that downloads sort of globally have been in decline. I think we've got a slide which will show that. This is the current state of the market. So downloads still form a large part of it, but they are in decline in most Western markets. So the US has seen quite a sharp decline of 12% over the past year. UK is a little bit smaller, but it's still a 6% decrease, but it still makes up quite a large percentage of the digital pie. So downloads are decreasing, but that's on a regional basis. When new services are launching in new territories which didn't have a download market, we're obviously seeing a sharp increase in those territories.
So when you say there's kind of a slow decrease in downloads, why is that? Is it because people just don't want to keep that much stuff on their devices anymore? I mean, what do you think that is?
Well, I think we currently have a very disruptive music industry. There are new things being created all the time. You know, Spotify is still not even 10 years old, as an example. Apple Music has just launched there's constantly new technologies and new ways of finding music. So it's just constantly being disrupted, which makes it interesting, but also difficult to really get a full handle on what the trends are, and they can shift quite rapidly. So I think there is a general shift to streaming overall. If you look at the biggest streaming platform in the world, which is YouTube, it far outstrips anything that Apple or Spotify combined, or any of the streaming services. So there's just a very huge shift in consumption towards streaming as a whole.
I mean, just in case there's not anyone that sort of understands, I mean, what is the difference between streaming and downloading? I mean, I think, you know, guys that are in the industry and established in the industry sort of seem quite affair with it, but I mean, I learned something from you guys yesterday, just in terms of like, you know, from Roach, who was on the panel with IDM and that sort of thing with you guys. in terms of, you know, caching stuff. I mean, I learned some stuff, so maybe you could just share a little bit of thought on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, streaming essentially it means you're playing a piece of media from a server, but it's not going onto your local computer. I mean, I think that's the very simple explanation of it. With downloads, you're actually downloading digital bytes onto your computer, and that's taking up hard drive space. And I think that's just a very simple way to sort of explain the difference between the two.
I mean, what do you think from a user's point of view in terms of like the psychology of users owning music versus actually renting music? Do you think I know you've only spent a short amount of time here, but do you think we're getting that, and particularly from an overseas point of view? You know?
I can't really speak a lot to the local market here yet, but I think internationally there's a huge shift in mentality. The way people are consuming music, and certainly young people have been consuming music since the start of the 21st century, is just a huge shift.
Shift to renting music as opposed to...
Yeah, the ownership model is still there. I mean, if you look at physical market in the UK, for example, it's still 50% of the market. If you look at physical in Germany, it's 75% of the market. So it's not everywhere. I mean, it's just depending on where the uptake. A lot of that is driven by broadband and internet access as well, depending on the market. But if you take Norway as an example, 80% of the population of Norway have Spotify accounts, which is crazy. So there's definite shifts in the psychology there, and there's a definite shift to people not owning music. And I think when you look at Apple Music as a service, that is definitely blurring the lines, because it's between owning and renting. It's definitely, it kind of psychologically makes you think that you own something with the depth, the sort of experience of the platform. The lines become very blurred.
Do you think people actually know that though? You know, in terms of like whether they're actually owning it or renting it from an Apple Music point of view?
I think a lot of the time they don't realise it.
Yeah.
I think when they close their accounts and their libraries disappear or their playlists disappear, that's when they realise it. So there is, you know, the general public, you know, really don't have the same sort of knowledge about it as perhaps the industry does, and nor do they probably care to. So yeah, most of the time I would say that they probably don't realise that they're not kind of owning the content.
I suppose from you know, kind of, you know, streaming is this huge buzzword there, but I mean, how fast is it actually growing from? Do you think the industry just likes to talk about it at the moment because it sort of helps them kind of move away from actually not knowing what the hell's actually going on in the music world, or is it just this is kind of like a distraction now? You know, sort of the answer to piracy. You know, I mean, what's the situation today?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, it is the buzzword in the industry, and it's what everyone talks about. But I think everyone kind of needs to be aware, and if you're an artist or label, that there are many. It's just one piece of the pie. So it's not, if you're pinning all your hopes on streaming as being a saviour, it's not there yet. It might be in 5-10 years' time. We don't really have the answers to that, and we can't really predict it. But I think you've got to look at streaming as one part, and it's a source of income that you can take advantage of and you can grow. So I think, you know, there's so much negative press around many factors around streaming, and some of it, you know, genuinely deserved, I would suggest. But I think you just have to start thinking about it as one part of your business model, and there's all these areas of income that you can take advantage of, and sort of be less sort of stressed about what streaming is and what the problems are around it.
I suppose that's kind of the key. It's not necessarily the definitive answer. You know, because I think in the panel that we were on yesterday, it was kind of almost this kind of a negative connotation to it, you know. But I think from a positive point of view, it just gives the artists out there another revenue stream to help survive if they're doing things properly, if they've got the backing behind them, which ultimately that's what you guys are enabling them to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at like the sort of platforms that artists are really readily wanting to use, SoundCloud being a prime example, that's non-monetized. You know, you guys aren't making any money from that platform, whereas you can cultivate a following across Spotify and other platforms where you're monetizing your content and you're building the follower numbers there, and you can utilize things in those platforms around algorithms, you know, push notifications, all that side of things. So they're very handy platforms, and at the moment there's people are too readily happy to give their music away for next to nothing or for nothing. And I think while streaming has its faults, there's still ways for you to take advantage of it, which is, you know, a very positive way.
There's recently been quite a lot of controversy in terms of artists and payments and that kind of thing with regards to streaming. I mean, what is your view on that?
Well, I think
actually just the splits around it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the controversy surrounds is pretty much around payback. There's a lot of misinformation. Again, we touched upon this on the panel yesterday. There's a huge amount of misinformation about paybacks and how it works and what people get paid. A lot of the time you have artists who are talking about it online, and they're saying, well, I got paid £6 for 6 million streams. And often the case is, well, they've been working with a label or a major label, and their contracts being interpreted in such a way that they're getting paid a very small amount of money. And that doesn't paint a true picture, that just means that that artist has a bad contract. So there's a huge amount of controversy around those areas, but it's a lot of misinformation as well. In regards to how streaming works at the moment, it's a royalty pool. So if you have ad-supported service, which is the free tier, freemium, plus the subscription service, you have all of that money put into a pot each month, and that is then divided by the total amount of streams, less, in most cases, 30% for the service for running the service. So that's how it works.
And then that 70% goes to the artist and the label?
In a nutshell, but various, you know, publishing money is mechanicals, you know, so various bits of it are chunked up and go off in different directions, but essentially, yeah.
So whose responsibility is that to track that? From making sure that those splits are going out to the right people? I mean, who's ultimately, I mean, you know, you guys obviously will pay that out or whatever it is, but who's ultimately responsible for that? Is it the manager, the publisher, the artist? Should be in his, you know, creating music. I mean, somewhere along the way, along that chain, someone needs to be responsible for actually figuring out what's actually due to them.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is where transparency is massively important in the industry, because so often it's not. I mean, from our point of view, we take revenue in from the services, we take off our distribution fee for providing that service, and then we provide full royalty statements and analytics to those clients. So they're fully aware of the revenue and what they've earned. And then from that chain, the label is then responsible to account correctly to the artist. Or, you know, whoever we're working with, whether that be directly with the artist, so there's no one further between us and the artist, or whether it's a manager or whoever's kind of running that. So it's a fairly simple mechanic, but it can get very blurred depending on how people are interpreting the contracts. And sort of one of the best pieces of advice I can give to anyone is really understand your contracts, whether that would be someone like us, a distributor, or with a label. In every piece of business you're doing, really understand your contracts.
I mean, I think we had a slide. Just Tara, if you can just so we can just sort of paint a picture here of the growth of streaming. But maybe you can talk to this just a little bit, because I mean, which kind of will lead into the next question, just in terms of, you know, what is the uptake of it from a global point of view, you know?
Yeah, I mean, revenues from music subscriptions rose 39% in 2014, and that's making up about 23% of digital revenue globally at the moment. So it's growing pretty rapidly. I mean, some headline things that are coming through since I've been out here. You've got Apple Music have just launched in China, which that's gone live yesterday, and that is reaching a potentially huge audience.
Yeah.
Another kind of interesting stat that's come out from Spotify is they're looking at the end of the year to have 100 million subscribers by the end of this year. We don't really know what the splits are between the free tier and the paid for subscriptions are as yet, but that's pretty huge in terms of a service. We've also got someone like Tidal who had a sort of fairly disastrous launch, which was quite amusing to be fair. But
where is that now actually?
Well, they've just
Dr. Dre's basement.
They've just announced yesterday that they've doubled in size, so they've gone from about 540 million 40,000 subscribers to about 1 million. So they're kind of, considering how badly that was handled, it's not bad. So what you see with someone like Spotify is growth is huge as they're going into more and more territories. They're just growing very quickly and rapidly. The sort of major issues is how much of those are not paying for the service. But on the flip side, because you're able to have such a huge global audience, that is probably now creating a much bigger platform and more ad revenue and more value for advertisers. So in theory, because that's reaching a real critical mass as a service, potentially the ad revenue could be, you know, significantly increased. So yeah, I mean, for example, Spotify isn't in Africa anywhere, and there's many kind of reasons for that. South Africa, I probably think it's to do with the cost of licensing from the major labels, and you know, the uptake in different countries will vary depending on internet penetration. But there are services that are growing. Deezer is another kind of French company that's, I think, 140 countries now, and does have the offering across Africa in some countries. So yeah, I mean, there's new services. There's services that you'll never have heard of in the Far East, which have really big followings. KK Box, which operates all across Southeast Asia. There's a company called Line, which is in Korea, which is another offering and has 500,000 subscribers after only launching a few weeks back. So while we all are very focused around Spotify and Apple and Deezer perhaps as the biggest three in that area, there's regional services that are really generating money. Another good example is San, which is in India, and that's got 11 million subscribers. So regionally there's big variations, but the general trend is really rapid growth in that area.
So those regions that you know, all these other services are coming from, they seem quite niche to those specific areas. Are they solely focusing on music in those areas, providing you know, whether India, for example, like you just said, I presume that 90% of that would just be Indian content, right?
Well, we're kind of pleasantly surprised in a lot of territories. While there is a focus, particularly editorially, on local artists, as there should be, international content does really well. When we opened up in Turkey and we sort of work with the majority of the independent labels there, still 65% of our overall revenue is international content as opposed to the local labels. So international music, there's a huge appetite for it. If you look at sort of an average label across Europe, they'll probably have 75% of their revenue coming outside of their home territory. So again, in terms of how you look at international, it's just really key, and there's a lot of money out there for you to take advantage of. And because you have global reach on platforms like YouTube and things like Spotify, you can reach a much wider audience if you're clever about it. So I think, again, another kind of big piece of advice is to think internationally. Do you have fans you can reach in other territories? And if so, how do you get to them?
I mean, what are the other revenue opportunities from a digital distribution point of view?
So yeah, we're obviously very focused on streaming here, but for us, we look at things like neighbouring rights, publishing, so we're looking at performance income and ways to get that back to artists much quicker, because if you look at the sort of collecting societies, you can take 2 years or more to get your money, so we're building in technology to try and find ways to get that to artists quicker, so that they're not having your money go on some big merry-go-round across the world.
How's that going?
It's very difficult.
Yeah, I was going to say, because...
yeah, I mean, it's, I don't have a lot of good words to say about those societies, to be honest, because they're protecting a sort of almost a cartel around what they do. They have the means, the technology, and everyone has the information to make it better. But yeah, they're protecting their own positions. But I think that will change, because they have to change, else they will become irrelevant and people will find better ways to get their money.
Yeah, I suppose that, you know, the platforms that are out there in terms of the DIY approach, you know, artists will eventually just sort of leapfrog that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I mean, we have run our own self-release platform for years now, which we've actually, but we acquired TuneCore, which probably, hopefully most people will know, which is the US self-release platform at the beginning of this year. So it's not my area of expertise, but you can, you know, if you don't have a distribution deal, if you don't have a label, if you don't have all those kind of things in place, you can still release your music globally and reach an audience and still use all the tools out there. You can still use YouTube, you can still use social media, you can still use SoundCloud, all those areas to really build an audience internationally as well as locally. So all the tools, despite not maybe if you're just starting out, they're there for you to use.
Just over the last couple of days, there's been a lot of talk about, particularly in the panel that we had yesterday, about you know, Roach from Merlin and African Dope was talking about a lot of the noise out there. You know, so if your product isn't great, you're actually part of the problem in terms of people being able to release substandard product ultimately. And then, you know, a lot of the panels that have been happening, it all comes down to product at the end of the day. So, I mean, ultimately that's where it starts and stops, really. So you're able to empower yourself as an artist, but if your product is not great, then you kind of stuffed anyway, really, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have mixed feelings about self-release platforms for those reasons, because you're adding to, while I like the idea of the democracy, so anyone can do it, but it also means there's a hell of a lot of bad music being released, which doesn't sell anything, you know, and it's just a waste of everyone's time. It's just taking up server time. But I think, like with everything in music, it goes back to the very simple equation. If you're writing great music, that's the starting point. There's nothing else to it, and then everything else you have to start working through and educating yourself to put into place. But without great music, it's not really going to work for you. But having said that, Justin Bieber's quite famous and he's crap, so.
Yeah, I'll rest my case on that. I mean, you guys, obviously you're focusing from an independent point of view, so, you know, you kind of obviously have, like, we were talking about it the other day, you know, you have your pop kind of stuff that's taking, you know, does relatively well, but you guys are focused on the niche stuff, you know, which is really encouraging for me, because I like to hear stories where you know, niche, credible music is kind of driven by a company like yourself. So you're first and foremost for the indies.
Yeah, I mean, indie music is almost completely niche. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast, because not a lot of it really breaks through into the mainstream. It's nice when that does, and you have an artist that really crosses over. But realistically, we operate with labels who exist in niches to differing levels of success. But there's especially when we're sort of going back to the subject here of streaming, the opportunity there is massive. And again, I kind of made the point yesterday. if you look at the top 10 playlists in Spotify, they're pretty much all exclusively major label content. They're very pop driven. Once you get beneath the surface across all streaming services, then the balance completely goes the other way. So you're looking at 70 to 80% indie content, because we have the content and the releases and the music that really works across mood, genre, themes, all those kind of playlists, which the sort of major label who are pop hit orientate don't have. So, you know, when you look at kind of the market shares across those playlists, we're nowhere as, you know, the indies up the top, apart from a few, you know, like maybe Adele or a Bjork, or, you know, someone who's really on an independent label but very successful. Underneath that layer, we're doing really well in terms of market share and far ahead of the majors. If you look at Beats One on Apple Music, which I think has been a pretty decent success, the percentage of indie music being played is higher than major by a long way. If you look at all the Apple Music radio stations, its majority of it is indie. So there's huge opportunities out there on streaming services for indie labels, and you just have to know how to present your catalogue, your new releases, the music, and start pitching in the right way.
So I think, does someone have a question over there?
Yeah,
can we get a mic?
So the question would be, how do you judge what is good music and what is not good music?
Yeah, that's very difficult. I mean, from my point of view, so I'm pitching releases to retailers. So I'll judge releases on their artistic merit, whether they're good or not, whether they've got good marketing campaigns behind them, whether the artist is really working social media. So we judge things on the merits of what they come in. So when on any given week we're not promoting that many releases, because we really pick releases on their merit from a retail perspective. And then we can really target the right stores for the right kind of music and have a bespoke approach. Because what's right for South Africa isn't right for the UK. So it's important both on a local level and an international level to really pick the right kind of music. And that's fed by labels, you know, who are coming to us.
Are you not in some way actually becoming the cookie cutter, where you're actually controlling how the music is being released into the world and saying to the people, well, we believe that 70% of it isn't great, but, and I get that. I mean, I'm a huge fan of YouTube and the covers that they do on YouTube, etc. But some of that has the potential to be great if it was developed, but it never gets developed if it never gets out there, and the risk never gets taken if there's no economic return on investment. So to a point, are you really not just like the majors, but maybe in a smaller realm or a more niche realm?
I don't necessarily agree with that, because we're 100% driven by the people we work with, and a large percent of the people we work with a lot of the time don't proactively inform us about releases or work with us to get their voice heard. So we have a lot of great music that we find out about that's in our system because the label hasn't really had a dialogue with us. So we're 100% driven by what our labels see as their priorities. And 9 times out of 10, they're spot on. So yeah, we're mostly driven, and you know, I work music that I don't like. You know, it's not like I'm an arbiter of taste, and I'll work releases that, you know, aren't particularly to my taste, but because they've got a lot going on and the label's working hard, there's a good plot around them. So no, we're not kind of. I don't think that we are like that personally.
That's perfect. Thanks.
Just from a belief point of view, I mean, what territories are you currently in Africa then? I think we've got a slide on that sometime. Yeah.
So as sort of a few caveats, these are all sort of top countries based.
Can everyone see that in terms of like what it actually says? I mean, it seems no. So South Africa is at it was 80%. I'm going from memory here. So South Africa's at 80%, and then everything else is significantly lower than that. Nigeria is at like 2.83, which was really surprising from when I saw this. Morocco 2.79, Algeria, and then a 2, and then it kind of all just drops down to 1, 1.5, up until Mozambique, which is like 0.35. So
yeah, so that's kind of our revenue percentages in Africa at the moment. A sort of a brief breakdown of them. I mean, there's a few caveats to that. We still don't work with a lot of the local services here. Africa in general, it has huge potential. It needs to open up in a number of areas, particularly broadband penetration, and I think once that happens, mass uptake of music consumption will be even bigger. So that's a thing that needs to happen across the continent in terms of investment. I think historically there's still a lot of problem about rights. A lot of recording contracts were made before digital existed, so therefore there's kind of quite a lot of rights disputes.
So it's kind of the technology is moving way before the actual industry is even. It's significantly a case of playing catch up to the technology, which is outpacing it by miles.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ultimate thing to get the continent moving is really just internet and having that infrastructure in place, and then in music across. And the infrastructure, the industry, everything will just explode in terms of its size and strength, and that will also empower that music to reach international audiences, because so much of it doesn't.
Because I mean, I know particularly from a South African point of view, you know, the cost of data here, and you know, from an internet service provider point of view, it's just astronomical. I mean. Again, Roach yesterday was talking about the fact that I think he said we were in the top 5 for the most expensive, you know, internet availability in the world. You know, which is just, I mean, I knew it was bad, but geez, I had no idea it was that bad. You know, so with that in mind, I was still quite surprised that 80% of penetration from a belief point of view is still coming from SA. You know.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably driven by the fact that, you know, we have a lot of international content which will be relevant and interesting to the market, particularly electronic music. We're kind of very strong in that area, so I know the electronic, you know, particular house and everything is very popular here. So it's probably driven by the type of content that we have on offer. And I think sort of going back to the previous panel that was before us today, I think internet access as well is all about empowering people with information. So, you know, a big theme has been educate yourselves, educate everyone, and you know, once people have access to resources online, once people are able to access all this information, then that will transform how people from every level within the industry, from a newcomer artist to how they work their music and how they're able to reach a market. So I think that is just still the be all and end all, really.
So I mean, from an artist's point of view, it's still from a DIY kind of thing. It still makes for them to be able to do it themselves. Do you think it's really as simple as that, or was it a case of like make sure from an overall business point of view that you've got everything in place?
Well, I think one of the most sort of misused phrases in music is the cream always rises to the crop, and it's just not true, because there's amazing music that no one's ever heard and never will hear because it just failed to gain any traction or get an audience.
Yeah, exactly, because my music's incredible as well, no one's ever heard of it.
Yeah, so I think there are tools out there that you can build an audience, you know. Facebook I'm kind of less happy to kind of endorse now, especially you have to pay to reach an audience, but there are platforms out there for you to help build an audience. One of the biggest things which never gets talked about and is the most effective form of marketing is email marketing. And you know, we go to all these conferences, no one ever talks about that. So they talk about all these different platforms. Data capture people who are coming to you. You know, even have a basic website that just says if an email sign up, simple things like that. No one really talks about it. It's far more effective than Facebook or any of these platforms, because if they're signing up to find out about you as an artist, then they're going to be happy to hear from you, and it's still the most effective form of marketing. So whatever you're doing, have email capture to capture your fans. You're better off having 100 fans who are willing to spend money on you than 20,000 fans who you can't reach and don't give a crap, quite frankly, So I think the ability to reach an audience is there. You just have to be smart about how you do it and identify that audience. So if you're making a particular brand of music, who are my peers? Who could I kind of identify myself, target that fan base in some way?
I mean, ultimately it comes down to about knowing your audience, knowing the content, knowing what you're about, what you're putting out there. And again, it comes down to that product, really,
Yeah, I mean,
that someone actually wants to buy it and gives a shit about it.
I think identifying the audience is the biggest thing that people do badly or just don't do at all. I mean, so many times, as I've run record labels in the past, I will get sent a demo that says, hey, check my music. So that's the first thing that they haven't put any effort into.
Or just literally a link through Facebook.
Yeah, and
then
it'll be
blows my mind.
completely inappropriate music. So, if you're running a deep house label, you get sent trance, hip hop, all sorts of things which you're not interested in. So even when people are sending out demos, they're not spending their time targeting and researching what good labels are out there that are making their kind of music. So doing a bit of customer research about who your audience might be, about relevant artists that are in the same sphere as you is really easy, but people just don't do it, and it's a simple way to identify people.
Which is even more important when you're thinking around from a streaming point of view, because there's so much content out there. You need to make yourself more relevant to that particular audience because there's that much noise, right?
Yeah, I mean, as streaming is growing up, we're getting access to more and more data. So once you've got an audience, you can start targeting that audience within the platforms, and we do that through advertising, audio, banner advertising, and now video advertising. And now that's kind of becoming more of the games, because Spotify have been listening to their users' habits for 7 or 8 years now. They've got all this user data on them. So now advertising within those platforms and how you use them can actually be very more specific, rather than just chucking mud at a wall and seeing what sticks. So again, the opportunity and the development of platforms and the data that's now being released by them is becoming much more interesting to everyone.
So I'd just like to open up to the floor. Do we have any questions out there from anyone?
Okay, now I'm nervous. I've done a release through TuneCore, and I just wondered if you had one of two questions. Real world sort of figures, because I know self-releasing, to buy these 2 coffees took about 1,200 streams, sorry. So, yeah, if you could open up some of that info as to...
Sorry, I didn't really understand that question.
Yeah, just any real world ideas of what it takes to earn $1, or how many streams it takes to earn $1, so people could understand.
I mean, I think as a general rule of thumb at the moment, it can vary, but about 1 million streams will earn you about 4,000 to 5,000 euros.
Okay.
That's roughly the ballpark figure.
Okay. And then the other question, for instance, the advertising revenue is what generates the money on Spotify. Apple is non-advertising based, so it's obviously got all the products and all that fueling it. They say that they are more artist friendly, give better rates and things like that. Is that known to be true? What are they?
I mean, I'm not able to discuss particular contracts, but I can tell you they're paying the going rate, so they're not, and in fact, in one particular area they're paying higher. So the overall rate that Apple are paying is higher than Spotify.
And lastly, do the network service providers give back any revenue to the system at any stage? Because they are the ones earning a huge amount of revenue of large amounts of data. Just wondering.
No, is the short answer.
Okay.
I mean, I think with ISPs, they just see themselves as a facilitator, which obviously has implications around piracy and other areas. But yeah, the ISPs are not very helpful to music in general. They just facilitate internet traffic in their view.
Okay, thank you.
I think there was a.
Can I ask a question? I read something yesterday. The guy who wrote Meghan Trainor's All About That Bass said that they'd had 178 million streams and he got a check for $5,000. So I know maybe you said that maybe he's got a terrible contract. Are there any like great stories, success stories of people making decent money on this that we can kind of hold out hope for?
I mean, I can't speak to any specifics. I mean, I can only speak about the labels that we work with. I mean, again, I kind of tend to dismiss a lot of what's written in the press and by direct artists, because without knowing specifically what their contract is, I have no idea whether any of that is really of any value or not. I mean, we work with a really famous electronic label based in Australia called Future Classic. And their streaming revenue is massive. It makes up nearly 65% of their revenue, and they're connecting with a younger audience. So that will probably kind of explain why there is a difference there. I mean, we've persuaded labels that we've worked with that who are windowing releases for a number of, putting their music on iTunes first. And then Spotify came sort of 6-7 weeks, in some case 3 months later. We made the case of the correct strategy, and now they've tripled their revenue on those platforms. So there is, as I say, it needs to be seen in context as a piece of the music industry pie that you're aiming to get, and it's not perfect by any stretch. And obviously, the paybacks on a granular level are really small, which everyone looks at and thinks, okay, we're doomed. But I think there are positives out there. It is growing. The revenue is growing from it. And if you take the right strategy and build yourself as an artist, use the platforms, around best practice.